and custodians of the lands and waters, including the lands and waters of Penrith City. Despite the extraordinary year we've all just been through, this is a really exciting time to be doing business in Penrith and to be thinking about doing business with the rest of the world. Our city is experiencing an unprecedented time of growth and change, and we've got an airport rising on our border with the promise of 200,000 new jobs in the Western Parkland city, and transport infrastructure like the Sydney Metro Western Sydney Airport line that will connect us to a raft of opportunity. You may have heard that the Western Sydney Airport will allow for a 36-hour delivery time for fresh and pre-prepared food to anywhere in the world. But even without the airport, Penrith exported $5.8 billion of product internationally in the last financial year. And this represents a 20.6% of all exports from Western Sydney. So the opportunity exists, and today you'll hear more about how you can take advantage of all that you sell for your goods and services overseas. I'd like to thank all the panellists and speakers today for their time. But before I hand back to Therese, I'd like to mention some of the ways Penrith Council supports local businesses to thrive both locally and internationally. Our council works closely with the Penrith Valley Chamber of Commerce, the Penrith and St Mary's CBD corporations to support a range of initiatives to grow our local economy. At the outset of the pandemic, we provided around $500,000 in support through waived commercial rents and fees and charges. In April last year, we joined with key partners to form 2 task forces to accelerate our economic and our social recovery as well. One of the initiatives that came out of the task force is our Penrith Proud and St Mary's Strong, which was a buy local campaign. And if you haven't signed up for any of these campaigns, I'd encourage you to do so. We also support businesses through a range of activations in our city centres. Just last week, we held Penrith Producers in a local park to promote local food and beverage businesses and attract more people to our main streets. And of course, council plays a key role in connecting our business community to resources and information by hosting events such as this. We know that as a result of the pandemic, many businesses are repositioning themselves. So if you're looking to try something new to expand your business, exports could be a great option for you. If you've already are an exporter, perhaps you're wanting to rethink the way that you operate. Either way, today's webinar is all about giving you information to help you move forward. And once again, I'd like to thank our speakers for each of you all taking part, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you, Karen. My name's Therese O'Dwyer and I'm from Regional Development Australia, Sydney. We are part of a national network of organisations that focus and support investment attraction, economic growth and jobs creation for our regions. This workshop today is an example of what we do. By building capability of our SME community, we are able to open up opportunities to them. And I just want to, as Karen said, I just want to thank all of these people today for giving of their time to kind of pass on their knowledge. I'm your moderator today, so I'll be popping in and out, introducing each different speaker. And there is a Q&A facility there, so if you want to ask a question, please do so. So I might get on to our first speaker, who is Dianne Tipping. Dianne is the chair of the Export Council Australia, and she's also a very seasoned exporter herself and runs her own business in that regard. So I'd really listen to Dianne. She's one of the topic experts. So I might hand it over to Dianne to start the session, really. Thank you.
I think you're on mute, Dan. Sorry, so much for seasoned exporter and seasoned person. Thank you, Therese. Thank you to the Penrith Council for having us today. It's very, very important we continue to spread the word of our economic prosperity going forward, and exporting is a way to do that. Today is really about why export, what are the benefits of exporting, and what is the way to manage that, how to get into it. And there's some great speakers when I finish my small presentation that will talk about the different opportunities and services available to get into export. We also have a great case study today when Liz Valek from Clover Fields, who will talk about what she has done in a long period of time to develop her export capabilities and develop an export market that I'm sure she's looking at how she can further develop, and we'll talk to her later in the session about some of those things as well. So just let me share my screen, please. Right, so Australian Export Council is the peak membership body for companies involved in international business. We've been established a long time, and we've done a lot of wonderful things over the years. We initially were called the Australian Institute of Export, and I did present our name wrongly a minute ago. We are now the Export Council of Australia. We do many things. We work with government, we work with businesses, we work with stakeholders, we work with industry bodies. Collaboration is important in trade. Collaboration with everyone brings back the information to us to allow us to provide more services and opportunities to Australian businesses. We do many things as the slide suggests. We develop international business skills. It's our core, actually. We build Australian business capacity. We conduct market research. We help to break down barriers to trade. We build global networks, and we inform Australian trade policy. One of the really important areas of our business, and they're all important, is our trade policy and research. We work very much with government and industry in doing a lot of very practical research. Some of the work we did last year was with IP Australia to look at how IP registrations are used by businesses in Australian businesses in other countries, and whether they can be supported more, how that IP registration can be protected further, and what Australian exporters are doing to protect their IP, whether they have registration or not. So the research document is on our website. It would be worthwhile if you're looking at this going forward when you enter the export market, or if you're already in the export market, about how to protect your registration, your IP registration. We have an innovative business unit called ECA Edge, where we look to influence governments and engagement in global forums. We include delivery and management of international delivery and development and social entrepreneurship projects. And one of those projects is Women Trading Globally, where we take a number of women regularly from developing countries in Asia most regularly, and we train them in trade capacity building and capability building. And this is a really great project in the fact that it's a gender diversity project, but it also enables women businesses that are small in their particular country to grow and develop and to learn how to build up their strategies and their ideas, and who to connect with, and how to become a stronger business internationally. We're very proud of that program, and it has been on hold this year, or last year during COVID, and we have not been able to visit women in other countries, or for women to come to Australia. Part of the program is they come to Australia to learn about how Australia does things so well in this area. The ECA Edge area also looks at domestic deliberations on how export works in Australia. We look at different things like global supply chain, we look at logistics, we look at everything that has a part in how Australia's economic prosperity is going to continue and will continue. And part of that is to ensure that we look at the export side of our businesses. We have a number of other areas of our organisation. We have our membership. Obviously, we're a membership organisation that was established over 60 years ago, so very proud of our history. We also very, very happily run the Export Awards for the Australian Government and many other recognising awards or awards of recognition for state governments. The Export Awards were not held last year, and that makes sense. I mean, it's very hard to celebrate export, prosperity when there are many companies that couldn't do the things that they normally do last year. So the Australian government, and we worked with them on this project, came up with an Australian Resilience Award, and there were some wonderful stories. It didn't mean that someone had to export. It meant that they were resilient in keeping their business going, keeping their staff employed, or able to give them work. It was really very heartwarming to get the stories from 364 companies around Australia and listen to them. It just was really great to see that we could continue and that we did continue. Some not in the same format, some changed, and that's part of COVID. And I think it's very important to realise that things do change, and we need to make the most of that now and move forward. So why export, really? I'll move on to why export. Okay, there's 8 billion, approximately 8 billion, close to it in the world, 8 billion people, and we have 25 million in Australia. The opportunities are there to sell to so many more people. That's one of the things that we need to think about. The premium price opportunities, and we do have what we believe and the world believes are premium products, and not just in our agriculture, but we have premium manufactured products, premium, value-added products. We have really great knowledge and skills in Australia, and we can get premium prices. We need to shop around. We need to look at different markets. Not every market's going to give us the same price, but we have the opportunity to sell great products, great ingenuity, and great services. We shouldn't forget that part of trade includes services, very much a part of how trade works these days. Our reputation, as I said, perceived product, service quality, advantage, Australian standards. Our standards are a world level, even higher than a lot of other countries in the world. So we have the benefits, we have the opportunities. We should be looking at how we can sell those things and those products and those services to other countries. We have the technology. We're highly skilled workforce. We have that technology. We should not look at one market only. We should be looking at many markets, and the Export Council, in conjunction with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, runs a monthly webinar series called Global Insights, and that's looking at how we as Australian exporters can expand our market. How can we get into many, many markets? Diversification is important. Diversification is not just about a product, and I'll talk about that a bit later, but it's about looking at different markets and how our product will fit into a different market. We have to adapt. We have to adapt to other cultures and other considerations in other countries, but we have that ability to do that. We're very agile as exporters in Australia. We have 15 free trade agreements with 25 countries. Now, if we can't get some benefits out of that, and then that's not good. We have a lot of opportunity to be able to look at countries and look at the benefits of what a free trade agreement may give us from that country. We're negotiating a number of other free trade agreements where we have signed off on RCEP, which is a free trade agreement between 14 countries, including Australia and New Zealand. And it has to be ratified yet. It hasn't gone through our parliament in Australia, but that's another opportunity. We have 2 other free trade agreements that we're negotiating with the EU and the UK. Lots of advantages here. So, why export? There's some good points there, some really good points. And economies in scale with your production. It's difficult to run sometimes, and again, it's not the same thing for every company, but to run a production line and to limit it to what you can sell within a certain domestic environment is sometimes a lot smarter to look at how you may be able to run that production line much more economically, much more, productively, if you look at the bigger scale of overseas buyers. So lots of reasons why we should export. And COVID has caused problems in many things in the logistics and the supply chain area, but it hasn't stopped people buying. And people are still wanting product in every country that we can think of. So it's just making our products suit the needs and working with the constraints that we have, which are always there. They're just a bit different at the moment with COVID. So current state of play in the market. And despite the disruption in trade and border closures experienced as a result of the pandemic, exports in Australia rebounded really, really well, hitting a 10-month high. Exports of goods and services from Australia soared by 6% month on month, and the highest level since March last year, okay? The demand improved in the wake of easing coronavirus restrictions. So coronavirus played a part in how our exports have worked. We have remained very high in our level of balance of payments, and that's what we export versus what we import. And a lot of that, to be quite honest, is to do with minerals and energy and our agricultural area. Although they're down, the agricultural area is down, and that's purely, or not purely, but very much in because of the logistics part of the equation there. If you think about our livable products, and they're the products obviously that come from the ground or the sea, so our meat and our vegetables, our fruit, and then our seafood, all of that has a shelf life, and it cannot sit around waiting for a ship to come in or a ship to take 20 days to get somewhere. It needs to go out fairly quickly. Our fresh, beautiful fruit, our grapes, our cherries, really world class and renowned and wanted around the world. Our lovely mangoes. Our beef, we export beef to over 100 countries in the world. It's very high level quality of meat, and not just beef, but any meat at all in Australia is very high quality. Our lamb is wanted by everyone. Our seafood, and we've all heard of the stories of lobsters and how well they sell in many countries overseas. The Australian government did support the livable products during the pandemic and bought in planes, charter planes, assisted with charter planes and flights, because we didn't have the flights coming in. We didn't have passengers coming in regularly for visits or work reasons. We didn't have tourists and whatever happening, going out, coming in, whatever. And we still probably won't have that till about October or November, or even maybe a bit later. This rise of numbers in Queensland is always worrying when something like that happens, because it puts another delay on how we may be looking at opening our borders internationally. So we've done really well, and we can still do well with our exports. Things are still moving, ships are still moving, although I do remember a conversation that we had just before we came online here today about the ship in the Suez Canal and how the ship is moving now, or has been moved, but it didn't move and was causing worldwide problems. But at the end of the day, ships have been moving. The things are happening and trade is going forward. So current state of play, as I said, you would know that Australia is well known for our iron ore, coal, petrol, and food and live animals. So our two highest export commodities are, our highest is minerals and energy, and our second highest is agriculture. But in that agriculture, we have some finished products, we have, value-added products, we have wine. It's a very large commodity base. Minerals and energy, it's a very large commodity base as well. Our third highest commodity or export commodity in terms of sales are services. Now, when we look at services, we're looking at inbound tourism, we're looking at inbound education, plus all the services that we sell overseas. And you probably don't think much about services, but even when a manufacturer sells a machine or a production line, as many do, many Australian manufacturers do sell overseas. In fact, they probably have around, on average, 50 to 70% of their market share is international. So when they look at that, there's always a component, and I won't say always, there usually always is a component of a service in that sale, such as commissioning, training, maybe installation, those sorts of things. So we are a service country. We do well with our services, but we can do better. It does say there the services sector did not fare so well, and that's because we couldn't do travel. We couldn't go overseas and do our consulting or install machines or do whatever needed to be done. So services did drop, particularly when we look at the tourism because of no planes and the inbound education. But some fantastic education companies in Australia set up with agents and partners overseas. They set up classrooms overseas. So instead of students coming to Australia, they did the virtual training, or they set up classrooms where students went to a classroom in another country, and then they had the virtual training as a classroom back to Australia. So people adapted, people were able to make it work. We will build on that. I see that being part of the future of all trade, that a lot of things will happen virtually, but it doesn't, it still doesn't replace that face-to-face communication and networking and building on relationships as you go forward. We have to adapt to what we have to do. So what should we take into account when looking at trade, at international trade? Currently, logistics, as I mentioned, is really not working extremely well. You are not able to get flights, not just as a passenger, but obviously cargo is very limited on international flights out of Australia. We are a long way from another country. Not, of course, counting New Zealand and the Pacific Islands, but our trading partners, our main trading partners in Asia, we're quite a distance, 7 or 8 hour flights in general from the New South Wales or Victorian parts of Australia, the lower parts of Australia. Not so far when you're up in Darwin or the top of Queensland, but a lot of the cargo does come, and we're talking New South Wales today, a lot of the cargo does come from New South Wales. And, a 7 or 8 hour flight with no flights, available, it's very difficult. So airlines are returning slowly, but not regularly. And as I said, most of the flights that come in are expats coming back to Australia, and the flights are going back out with some passengers, but limited cargo. It is hard, the logistics for air freight. And I do hope that October, November is when we open up the borders to more flights and not just return Australians, but people coming back, tourists, maybe inbound education, but we won't know, and we just have to see what happens there. Sea freight has been extremely busy. Ships are really, initially when COVID happened, ships just were cancelled, sailings were cancelled, cargo couldn't be loaded in a number of ports overseas because of the COVID restrictions, people not allowed near the ports and so forth. Australia has done a great job. We've kept the ports open, but there have been problems. There's been congestion at every port in Australia, empty containers sitting around, not being reallocated to other countries. And if you think about the container system, if you think about a ship with, 6,000 or 20,000 containers, depending on the size of the ship, if you think about that ship and that's dropping containers off in a particular country and they're not getting containers back out of that country, there's no reallocation of containers. That container asset is important. It has to move around the world, that empty container, either full or empty, it has to move. And just recently, as a state of play, 10,000 empty containers were taken out of Shenzhen and removed or reallocated or repositioned into LA. So that means that 10,000 more containers are on the ground to be loaded. If without those 10 empty containers going in, it's very hard to load cargo into containers and on ships. So the logistics problem has been quite severe. Prices have gone up, both on air freight particularly, but more so also on sea freight. And we have had a lot of surcharges applied at different ports, not just in Australia, but around the world, due to the extra costs of managing the pandemic and the situation regarding, the processes around all of that. So, but it will get better. I don't think we'll ever go back to really, really cheap prices, but the rest of the world, we need to remember this, the rest of the world's in the same spot, in the same position. The supply chain is really, really interesting. A lot of Australian manufacturers, a lot of Australian producers have relied a lot on international supply chains. They've relied a lot on raw materials or components coming into Australia to support their production or their growth or their manufacturing, and that's been disrupted terribly. And so we have moved a lot to looking at how we can produce more in Australia. This will be something that will take a long time, and maybe Stefan, who's from Department of Industry, may talk about that with their manufacturing, processes and ideas and support going forward. But it will take a long time, and we need to think about the supply chain and how we manage that going forward. Digitalisation or digitalised, I can never say that word, sorry. It particularly has played an important part in this pandemic, and we have now got a lot of our export documentation, which is critical to be part of that goods movement or even services movement. That digitalising of processes has become really something we've done quite well, and the rest of the world has done quite well, and we need to continue that. We need to continue the ability to minimise the facilitation of trade, the way that we are able to do the trade, the way that we're able to manage the paperwork, the processes, all of that. E-commerce has really come of age in COVID, and many companies have looked at e-commerce as a way to support their normal trade processes during the pandemic. Other companies have looked at e-commerce as, strength to their vertical trade systems, if you like. I think if a company is doing e-commerce, it's a great way to start in the international arena, depending on the product, of course. But it's a vertical system that should be built on and looked at as building eventually into how you can make that a more sustainable export process going forward. And the one thing that really does have to be part of everything that you think about, it's risk mitigation. So we learnt through COVID that we had supply chain issues. We learnt that logistic issues were very difficult to support during these types of situations. We turned to e-commerce. We're looking at digitalising all of our processes. Our risk mitigation needs to take a look at all of those things when we're going into trade or any business and any facet of business, and look at what the issues are and what is their risk mitigation to support that or help that when something goes maybe a little wrong during the time in trade. So we really recommend that Australian businesses look at doing an export business plan. And if you're going into export, you should be doing an export business plan, not just a business plan, but an export business plan built on your business plan. You should be looking at how your product will suit another country, how it will fit into another country. Does it meet the requirements of regulations, tariff concerns, packaging, labelling, depending on the product, or even just culture in another country? How will your product go in a country? It may be, top of the line in your business sales here, but is that a product that will sell in a particular culture overseas, in a particular way that a country lives and works differently internationally? So research is vital, understanding the product itself, understanding the country that you want to look at. And it doesn't matter what country, we would suggest support yourselves with looking at a number of countries, looking at how you can get that research. And there's a lot of organisations that will help you with that. And we'll talk about that as we go through today's session. Obtain feedback from people that know a little bit about trade. Write your own plan. Don't get someone to write it for you, because you're ultimately responsible for what happens. And you don't need to do all the things in that plan when it happens, but you need to understand what the things are in that plan. You need to understand the key points that you need to think about in your plan. You need to look at financials. It's great to look internationally, and a lot of businesses do well internationally, very, very well. But it's not very rarely $1 million revenue overnight. It's something that is built up over a period of time. Like any business, even domestically, you turn around one day and you think, oh, I haven't done too badly. I'm okay, but you've put a lot of time and effort over maybe 10, 15 years into that. So exporting is the same thing. It's not normally an overnight success. It takes many, many years of planning and building up your knowledge and resources and information before you realise that you have succeeded in some way to be a successful exporter. Test your financial projections with the bank, with your finance people, with other people that know about export, and do an executive summary on the whole prospect of what you want to do. Obviously, exporting is good. I support it totally, and it is good for you, your business, the community, but Australia, but it's really important that it's done correctly. There's some really sad stories where domestic that happens as well. You need to, and we'll get a copy of this webinar and the presentations, but you need to consider your domestic overview. And by that, I mean, if you're not doing very well successfully or being very successful domestically, export probably won't solve the problem. You need to be very clear about what you're doing domestically and then build on that for your export market. You need to have an offer and a value, and a value proposition is really important. What makes your product unique to another product in the market? And there's very few people that have a monopoly product these days. Even a carrot, and I always talk about the carrots when I talk about trade. If you look at a carrot being sold overseas, what makes an Australian carrot better than an American carrot or whatever? And there are differences. If you're a carrot grower, you would know all the differences. You would understand that some carrots are quite sweet, some can be made to a certain, grown to a certain size. The ability to export carrots in the seasonal situation differently to when other countries do their carrot productions. So they're the sorts of things that are your value, and you need to think about that. A simple carrot can be sold quite successfully. There's exporters out of both Queensland and New South Wales, but more so Queensland and I'm not suggesting we all go and grow carrots, but WA, that do around 25 containers a week of carrots, so carrots can be sold to overseas countries. That's just a product that I'm mentioning because it's one we probably none of us will do here. It's just really interesting to think you can sell anything, I should say. You just need to understand the value in that product and what makes it unique and what are your plans and conditions on selling it and how can you sell it. You need to look at your strategies to get into a market, as I said, your financial resources, your payment. No good having a great deal if you don't get paid, so making sure you look at that. And the currencies. Currencies are critical. You can lose all of your profit on a currency situation. Having qualified staff, and that doesn't mean go out and support and build up a new export office overnight, but having someone there that knows a bit about export or learning about export as you go forward, doing training and information sessions and going to everything that all of the government departments and organisations offer to understand more about the trade positioning, if you like. Making sure you're ready to export in that you can supply when you say, looking at the regulatory requirements, looking at competitors, and these days with your Google search and everything, you can do quite a lot yourself, although Austrade, and Hanh will talk more about that later, are able to offer assistance in looking at contacts and competitors overseas, maybe not competitors, but contacts and connections overseas, and protecting your brand and having effective contracts. So I talk about IP again, and having a contract that is strong, supportive, and enables you to be clear about what your objectives are in that sale or possible sale and what the requirements are that you need to comply with. Okay, government agencies that I've talked about already, you have Austrade and TradeStart, and Hanh will talk more about that as it comes online. You have DISA, which is the Department of Industry, and Stefan will talk about what they can offer as we go forward. You have the Department of Home Affairs and Border Force, and that's really important to understand what the regulations are to export, to understand that you need to get clearances to export, and in some products you'll need to get not just Border Force clearances, but you'll need to get Department of Agriculture door clearances as well. But you might be a manufacturer and you have products that are maybe in the defence area. You will need to get DECO clearance for that, the Department of Export for Defence Export area, you will need to have consideration about finance, and EFA is an area that you can talk to, and we'll hear more about what they can offer going forward. IP Australia can offer advice on registration of your IP and what you may need to do. And then you'll have the New South Wales government that will offer support on global through Global New South Wales on what the government can do. And Penrith Council, not speaking for them, but I'm sure they're very happy to connect you with the right people and put forward ideas that will give you some guidance on what to do and how to go forward. So thank you. I'm sure we'll talk more. I would like to ask some questions and answer some questions. So if you have questions, please put them through the chat box, and we have a question and answer session at the end. Please do that. And we will also talk to some of the speakers today more at the end on some questions that we will raise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dianne. That was really very interesting, and you always do a good job. So the next speaker I have, and I like this session because it's from a business. It's from a person that's doing it on the ground, and these sessions I always learn something, because they always say, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I did this and it worked, you know, like, so it's really good stuff. So today we've got Liz Valek from Clover, and she's giving her time today, which we really appreciate. And Liz has got some very innovative products, including shampoo in a bar of soap, or a soap bar shape. It's quite amazing, really, and it's got a really great value to it as far as costs go, and it also is environmentally much more sound. So I just want to pass you over to Liz, who's going to tell us her export story. Thank you, Liz.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm the director of Clover Fields, and my company is primarily a manufacturer of soaps and body care products. And we're located in Penrith, which for anybody tuning in later is about 1 hour approximately inland from Sydney. We're well placed here in Penrith because we're part of the Sydney metro area, which is a really good point for freight and whatnot. Anyway, so we've been manufacturing for almost 40 years, and we started as a cottage industry. So like many others, I didn't have a business background, and I've had to gain and still am gaining the skills I need to run my business effectively, which leads me to a bit about my export story. So I'm echoing a lot of what has already been said, but also adding a little personal perspective. So what made us start to export, and how did we do it? Well, historically, we relied on doing trade fairs, people approaching us, trade journals such as the Australian Gift Guide magazine, and business just came to us. We didn't actually actively go out and seek it, and then we became a little more professional and thought, well, enough of just sitting back passively, we'll go and become a little more polished. We worked with Austrade way back. We did trade missions, we did one-on-one visits, client matching, and it was very effective for a number of years. And we traded on that for quite some time. So we also did a lot of travelling overseas and saw our own customers, pharmacy, department stores in the USA and the UK in particular. So we've tried almost every approach. And all that, as I've said, has been successful. But in 2019, we did something different. We decided to launch into not just assisting exporters, importers of our, that we export to, I should say, in different countries at their trade fairs, and giving our time and our expertise and backing them up. We decided we would do our own trade fairs overseas and seek some more export potential, because that's what I know and I've done for a very long time. Then, sadly, COVID hit all over the world and all those trade fairs were cancelled. We only did Hong Kong before the Cosmoprof, before the COVID came out. So in that time, the world's changed rapidly, and we're having to rethink and reposition like everybody else. We suffered initially with COVID and went into a panic and a meltdown, but in fact, to be positive about it, it's given us time to strategize, think things through, look at where we can grow, and we innovated and we grew our e-commerce. Our online sales was not a big part of our business. It was a tool for retailers to look at our wholesale pricing and our catalogue. It was just sitting there as a tool purely to offset our wholesaling. But no longer. It changed rapidly, and we have as well. So big learning, you know, for us. So given what has worked for us in the past, I can't stress enough, and I'm pitching this at people who are like us and thinking about getting into export, and small companies that need to skill up. So I'm all for utilising whatever skill set someone has that knows more than me. And it's really important. If I hadn't had Austrade, if I haven't on occasion rung the Export Council, I'll touch base again soon with the Chamber of Commerce, Australian Chamber of Manufacturers, all sorts of groups, so Australian Business it used to be. So they're all worthwhile. Even somebody in business who knows more than you that you'll come across. And I've found that most people are actually happy to share their skill set and their experiences, and hopefully pass things on so you don't make mistakes they've made. I certainly do. So always put your hand up and ask for help, because it's already been said by Dianne very, very clearly that you have to get this right. There's a lot of mistakes to be made and the information's out there, so please avail yourself to that. So just using me and my company as an example in relation to that, I'm rewriting my export business plan as we speak. We're looking at now, we are reaching out to the world without having to be there, Johnny on the spot, doing the trade fairs, travelling, because that is not possible. And we are looking at more e-commerce trade in particular through replenishment or 3PL warehouses. So that's new sort of marketing that I've got zero skill set with, and I will gain that and I will find out. And I've had a wonderful discussion already with Dianne. So again, then if you look at that, I'm back where I was nearly 40 years ago. I'm learning something from the ground up, but I can do that. And I know that I have the market there. I know I have the product, and I know my company is positioned in the best place it's ever been for increasing my export potential. And that's a really good point that was made earlier. So to be ready for that. So it's some of the things to be ready about, and the rights and wrongs that I was asked to comment on. There's lots of them, but here are just a few. So one of the biggest mistakes that I've made in the past is actually not getting enough information on the inquirer themselves. Somebody approaches you and wants to import and presents themselves a certain way. Your product may not be culturally correct on their market. It may not be financially viable. They may not be as they represent themselves. Vetting and inquirers and establishing their bona fide was very difficult in the past. It's not as much now, but because you can just Google and so on and so forth, and you can ask consular officers to check their company registration and get a little history. There's all sorts of avenues open to you. But it is really important, and you have a lot of people waste your time, because anybody can just say, I want to import your product, send me all your pricing, send me samples, and it just becomes a very time-consuming and time-wasting exercise. So know who you're talking to. That's one of my biggest mistakes. Even when I've had people face-to-face at a trade fair, you know, you never hear from them again. They're just professional time wasters. So I'm now more aware of that than I've ever been before, because my time is very valuable. My staff's time is valuable. And one of the things that I think in myself, I'm very upfront and honest in the way I approach my business. I never in nearly 40 years have asked a company overseas to send me samples air freight and expect all that with no charge. I immediately ask for their bank account and I'll offer to transfer the payment, whether it be $50 worth of post and $10 for their samples. I'm establishing myself as a genuine inquirer. And I've paid for that service and for those samples. So now, at the very least, when we provide samples to someone overseas, I'm happy to provide a reasonable amount of samples, but I think the least they should do is pay or organise their own freight. So that's a really little thing. And it might sound silly to mention, but looking at me, I have just wasted thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars over the years. So I really think, don't be afraid to make somebody establish themselves. I've got a hit list of questions. I ask them about their infrastructure. I ask them what other Australian companies they import from, and I'll call and get a reference. I'm actually going through that process this week. So those are really important things. And another issue with buyers, and I still get asked this nearly sometimes every day, and it's about those effective contracts that people talk about. They ask for it straight away, exclusivity. I've 2 companies at the moment wanting to look at putting the swap items, the swap items on Amazon, and their opening inquiry line is exclusive distribution through Amazon and other channels. Well, I've learnt a lot more over the years. You can actually pick the wrong company. You can be very pressured. In my greenness and naivete years ago, I would be bullied a little bit and think, well, you know, fair enough, they're investing money. They're saying they're going to do this marketing and they're having ongoing cost, trade fairs, promotion. I need to be honest and do the right thing and give them a fair amount of time to build that market. So that's all great, but what I've learnt from that now is if anybody does have you sign any type of contract for market exclusivity for their area, index it to some expected volume of sales. Do something to protect yourself, and really I'd strongly advise not to do it. So I'm just waiting for there's 2 companies in the US, for example, because I intend to market, and I also already do some small amount of marketing there. Wait for that to get into the nitty-gritty and just say no. So it'll be the first time I just stand my ground and say, no, that doesn't suit me. I have other, if they want to buy my product and do that, that's the deal. So I've grown up a little bit, but think about that quite a bit and ask for advice about that, because it's been a big hole I've fallen into many, many times. And you can't bow to every single customer's request, because that costs you money at the end of the day, no matter what. And we're all grateful for orders. We all want to sample people and want to get them on board. We all want to export. We all want to make the sale, all of those things. But you're in the driver's seat. And so many times in the past, I've lost sight of that. And it really, you've just got to take control and do what is reasonable and fair for your business and how you want to conduct your business and within your capabilities. So anyway, so that's just my bent on that. And I know there are, this is about currency and payment options. I know there are a lot of options, okay, but I have always felt very strongly. Are you all hearing me, by the way? I should have checked. Okay. All right. Okay. The other thing this is a personal thing with me, so I'm not saying this is to do 100%, but this is what I do. I've had a lot of pushback on this over the years, but I think Australia, and always have thought this, that we're a force to be reckoned with. We are a country of our own. We're not the USA. I quote in Australian dollars. I always have. I've been bullied to quote in UK pound many years ago, and it was really hard, and they wanted a free and stored, you know, to the UK. When you're dealing with so many variables with foreign currency and freight, you can get burned so easily. And what I do is I quote X works in Australian dollars. That's it. You want to buy my product, I'm an Australian company. No, I will not quote you in US currency. Yes, I know you can lock currency deals in. I know all of that. I've learned all of that, but it doesn't work for me. It's too much work. I don't automatically start asking someone overseas to offer me that in Australian dollars. I deal with what currency they ask me to deal with. So I think fair, tit for tat, fair's fair. Sometimes I will quote FOB to Port of Sydney if I've done the costings and the volumes there and so on and so forth. So cost your charges in and know all that terminology. And I know the Export Council, and I've attended one many years ago, did a great little workshop on all the freight terminologies. Anything like that, go along and attend those, because you might think you know it all, but you don't. And trust me, it's worth knowing all that right terminology. So attend some of those workshops, and if not, pick up the phone and ask. They've got sheets and sheets of information that you can get. Everybody is wonderful with help like that. So another thing with exporting is to be strict about your minimum invoice value. And again, it comes back to knowing what you want. People overseas don't give me options. They say it's 1 20-foot container, or you have to get $10,000 US or whatever. They don't budge on it, because that's what those are their terms. So, and their minimums. But here we get asked quite a lot to do small opening orders. And again, you do it because you want to make a start. You want to be fair. They've got a trade fair coming up. But sometimes that can set the precedence for ongoing small orders. And I'm in the middle of that at the moment with a Malaysian company, and we can't seem to break out of that. And in fact, their orders are frequent, but they're no more than a normal retail shop here in Australia. So it's it's a bit of a trap to fall into. So, and another little nuts and bolts thing, pack your orders really well. Know, for instance, simple things like putting stuff on wooden pallets, and then you're looking at fumigation charges. Speak to freight forwarders, speak to everybody. Once something leaves your hands, and especially goes out of the country, it's really, really hard to fix it up if you make mistakes. I've heard some real horror stories. Little things like getting all your ducks in a row with documentation. If you have your packing list that's slightly different, or a different code number, it can be held up in customs. On the other end, you're looking at someone whose English is maybe a second language, and they're looking at it literally. So little examples, like instead of a 250 ml bottle of bubble bath, it might be bubble bath or bath bubble bottle by 250 ml that the customers called it, or something. And it can be something that small. So literally everything, we just make it identical across the board for ease of customs clearance. So we have to do a lot of declarations as manufacturers and certificates. So I'd urge anybody exporting to learn all of that properly. If you make mistakes, it's dreadful and costly. You can get documents stamped by the Export Council and Australian Business. They've got whole departments that will give you templates and things and talk you through that. So even an ordinary certificate of origin, right? Things that you don't know, you have to learn. It's a huge amount of learning, but the information's there. So regulatory requirements. I was saying to Dianne last night, there's a thing called Proposition 65 for the state of California about certain chemicals that they list that they don't want to use. That is changing all the time. I spoke to a major chemical company here just last week who said they sell chemicals. They have never heard of Proposition 65. So, if you want to sell to the US, a lot of those things on that list now people have adopted nation countrywide. So that's just one of the things. Maybe if you need language translation, if you need different colours and things for different countries are on their no-go list for importation. It's registration, like the EU registration. I'm still at the beginning of having done that process for the first time after all these years myself. It's a big thing to go through. I've got a document that is basically my terms and operating conditions that is on every quote initially with anybody, and I've got a domestic and I've got an export one. I've just amended it to state that although I will assist to the best of my ability with compliance of product, that the onus ultimately will fall on the purchaser to check with their regulatory bodies on their end. So in other words, I think that legally is protecting me a little bit. Should somebody get a product and say, well, this, you can't use this colour dye, it's just now been listed on this cosmetic list that we don't like to have imported, so we need to send all your stock back. So far I've just been okay. But this week, today, as I'm sitting here talking to you, we're repackaging 17,000 boxed bars of a product that was for the local market that had a compliance because misprint, and we're doing that to fix that up for the customer. If that had left the country, I can't imagine what would be involved with that. So that is, as we speak now, a real thing that we're doing here in my factory. So talking about risk mitigation, get your information about all of that to the best of your ability up front. As I've said, I'm still learning. Things can't be fixed easily once they leave your hands. It's really important. Lastly, one of the things we get asked a lot is about, and this was touched on, especially Chinese customers. They say, and what is your daily capacity? What's your manufacturing capability? And they nearly faint when I say, well, on a standard soap bar, we have high volume capacity equipment. We can make 30,000 bars a day. They are thinking that we're a cottage industry and I'm still making, well, I did, moulding 12 soaps at a time and popping them out and wrapping them. Okay, so that's how I started, but now I've got a manufacturing business. And the reason, and I know from a lot of seminars that I've been to and people I've talked to, the reason they need to know this, they're not asking to be rude, it's because they've had issues with continuity of supply. A lot of Australian companies didn't do a lot of what Dianne had mentioned. They haven't got all their ducks in a row. They haven't got the infrastructure. They suddenly have got a great big export order and they can't fill it. And I know that that's happened a lot with importers of Australian products. So it did for a while create a little bit of a lack of confidence. So that's why they're asking, you need to prove your flexibility and your ability to upscale your production, that you are an established company, and that you won't let them down. It's really good to have that good reputation and to reassure them. But you can't do that if you haven't got your domestic and your business sorted out from the get-go. And I think be prepared then and know your strengths and weaknesses first. If you haven't got well-established domestic sales to sustain your business, you can fall down and you don't have all the good benefits you should get from exporting. And my example is I relied very heavily at one stage years and years ago on exports to the UK. And we had a great relationship with one particular importer there, and it was Lakeland in the Lakes District. And they had a huge personal care division. They had stores and they had a catalogue. They just decided to focus their energy on the kitchenware and dissolve that whole division. Therefore, I lost a long-standing customer of big volume, and instantly the exchange rate changed also. It wasn't in my favour, and I lost all my exports to that part of the world through no fault of my own. So if I'd had all my eggs in one basket, for example, and were relying just on my exports for my growth and stability in my business, that wouldn't have been a sound practice. So anyway, to wrap it up, I hope I've said more positive than negative things and hopefully some helpful hints. And I really do encourage you to jump in and don't be afraid. Exporting can really grow your business. It is good for the country, but please get that help and advice and then get started. Do it in that order. And I'm really a very proud Australian and a proud Australian exporter, and I'd really love to see everybody who's ready, willing and capable of going down that path to do that too and embark on that journey. So thanks for taking the time to listen to me, and I wish everybody great success. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. That was really good, really good. Just such valuable information for people. The next person is sitting next to me. This is Stephan Wagner, who is the Regional Manager, Western Sydney Oz Industry. And Stefan is really the expert on every program that you could ever know about. So I'll hand it over to Stefan.
Yes, good morning everyone, and thank you Dianne, and thank you Liz especially. All the things you said just resonate so true. So what I wanted to do was share with you a couple of things that are available, but I also want to make sure that, and just as on the outset, that a lot of the material I put on a couple of slides here, you can get access to, and we'll send it around to you, because these aren't really slides that I would, typically expect people to remember everything. They are more of a reference tool. So with that in mind, I'll get Julie to activate the slides, and I'll use that as a way to just give you a very brief introduction on where Oz Industry sits. Now, and keep in mind that Oz Industry is essentially the customer-facing brand of the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources, similar to where Austrade is the customer-facing brand for DFAT, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So our ability to then help businesses is largely what I'm going to talk to. And part of this is what Liz spoke to, as well as Dianne, is trying to make sure that your business is essentially ready for export. So if you bring that up to full screen, that'd be great, Julie. And I don't know if you can do that, please.
Trying to do it. It's a bit tricky because.
Oh, sorry. You can do that. Apologies. Just take it off to the next slide, and I'll keep talking to that whilst you fiddle. That's fine. The thing I always like to do is to kind of remind everyone, and Liz will appreciate this as well, and any new business appreciates that every business, when they start, they always start with a brilliant idea, and typically it's businesses that it's a craft of that business. It's some sort of expertise that business has, which they wish to then turn into a business opportunity, a product idea like Liz's. It could be a new fantastic innovation. And then the aim of most businesses then is to and I'll simplify this just for the purposes here, so we're all speaking the same language, is to essentially commercialize that idea, because you've got this wonderful thing that you can demonstrate, but now you want to wrap a business model around it. And this applies to every business locally and anyone that wants to export. You have to get this right. You have to be able to wrap a complete business model, all the things that you have to do to establish a business, as opposed to just a craft. And then the next phase of any business is you typically start to operate. And this is when you're growing, you're marketing, you're engaging. And the one thing that I wanted to emphasize is there are lots of challenges. And don't be afraid, as Liz said, is to learn from your peers, learn from other service providers, from a network as you start growing your business. Now, if you go to the next slide, please, Julie. So the next slide, all I wanted to do there was just highlight the fact that every business has lots of pain, okay? And we're not, all of us here are here to help you. And I just mentioned a few here that keep everyone awake at night. Now, there's a lot of challenges we face with COVID-19, the speed of change, trying to get quality people, trying to retain customers, all these aspects. This is it's in your head all the time, and it keeps you awake at night. And again, the one message I just wanted to bring together, which I'll lead into then the summary of our programs and services, which Liz touched on, is whatever you do, reach out and network. Connect with other people, connect with the people you've got here on this particular call, and we will introduce you to all the avenues of help. And that'll lead on to the next slide. Again, I'm trying to capture things in a very short time frame here. This slide I put up, you can just enlarge that a tiny bit there. So what I've done here is for everyone for the exercise is just recognise that when a business starts, and again Liz touched on this, so Dianne, there's lots and lots of risks which you most of the time you're not even aware of them, and that red curve is your risks start to go down over time. And the other thing that's very painful at the beginning is you're desperately trying to get money. Okay, because you're having to fund your business, fund your operations, fund your manufacturing, fund your staff. Really important to pay those staff. And we have this term that, you know, there's this painful area called the valley of death that a lot of businesses don't even get to trade effectively, and they're still burning lots of cash. And this is a very painful time for them. And there are areas that we can assist on this. And then typically what happens is after a couple of years of operating, and even before you export, you can't see the entire wood for the trees, is where that blue curve is where the cash flow curve starts to flatten a little bit. And often you go, well, hang on, what's going on? Everything was going well, I was growing, and you often flatten a little bit before you get that next surge to try and continue and sustain and grow the business, which Liz has done very successfully over 40 years. Just scroll up a little bit, and there's a little anecdote at the bottom of that slide. I just wanted to highlight that typically a large number of businesses fail in the first 3 years. And that's because, and one of the main reasons is they really don't do enough of the basic homework. And a lot of it's available. We've all touched on that. And some people get very excited about overseas opportunities and exporting, but you've got to get your house in order here as well. And this is a fundamental statistic. 60% of SMEs fail within those first 3 years of starting. And it's just the basics they're getting wrong, and they can't meet their debtors, or they can't supply things, etc., etc. I won't go through all of that here. That's the next slide, please. Julie, let's scroll up. Now, this is a very noisy slide, and I apologise for that. It's more of a reference. There are a lot of programs available that our department directly runs, and these are what are called our flagship programs. You can claim money, the R&D tax incentive if you're doing research. You can help get through that valley of death under our entrepreneurs program through a granting program called Accelerating Commercialization if you've got a new innovation. And then when your business is more established, we've got a number of programs that help you collaborate with universities, and you provide access to consultants and advisors to help look at all aspects, including, like Liz mentioned, even your e-commerce platform and your HR practices and your ability to meet the right logistics requirements that you need to establish yourself both locally and offshore. All of these services are available for businesses, but there are criteria, and I've only very much summarised them at the bottom of this slide. That, you know, it's in very simple terms, government uses this language which I try and demystify. I have spent most of my life in the private sector, and for 40 years working for large multinationals, and now I have my own small business. But when I joined the public service, one of the things that I found very frustrating was that when we speak to the public, that we need to be able to make sure that the language is understood. And we use language so frequently and we forget that we have to demystify it. So don't be afraid to ask any one of us. There's language like an R&D tax incentive is an entitlement. A lot of granting programs are what they call competitive. In other words, you are competing with others for that money. But yes, there are fundamental programs like the guidance programs, which you're just simply eligible for if you've traded for more than 3 years and you turn over more than 1.5 mil. So just be aware of those languages, have a look, and ask the questions of us here. Again, I'll slide up. I recognise this is it's a summary and a lot to digest, and I'm conscious of time. So next slide, please. Now, this is a very detailed summary of everything that, to the best of my knowledge, nationally and New South Wales, that you could take advantage of to help start your business from advice. There's Business Connect mentioned here, entrepreneur facilitators, there's growth centres, there's the export. The language is on this slide. You can find it all if you do either Google searches or on our website, business.gov.au. I'm not going to go through it here because we've got other speakers that will touch on some of those things on that roadmap. But I just wanted you to be aware there's lots of support available. Scroll up, please, Julie. And a lot of that is captured on one website. Most of it is nationally and locally. on business.gov.au. You can find nearly everything there. The other thing for businesses, there's lots of good tools, there's lots of templates, there's lots of links, and there's lots of funding opportunities where they are applicable, where the tax, you know, the policy people have decided they want to throw some money at it. There's a number of big programs being launched at the moment to overcome the COVID situation to do with manufacturing. And the one piece I wanted to add here that Dianne touched on very strongly, and Liz did as well, is that our manufacturing in the eyes of most of the countries over offshore is seen as a global exemplar, i.e. they trust our manufacturing. We need to have much greater confidence not to compete on price. And often we all suffer this. We want to try and, you know, make the product as cheap as something from China. Do not go down that path. It's a hiding to nowhere. But the reason I'm telling you this is there are many successful businesses that stand by their price. There's many exporters that I've been across, large complex manufacturers, that in their defense have stuck with their premium price, and they have been very well rewarded by that. So build that into your business plans. As Dianne said, build that into your export business plans. Don't be afraid to stick by your value proposition. That's the thing I wanted to leave you as a final message, and we're all here to help. So thank you very much for your time. Use these slides as a reference tool, and thanks for your short time on the screen here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. That was very good, as usual. Just want to repeat, we're going to be sharing our slides today and also the recording. So I might introduce our next speaker, which is Hoang, and Hanh is the Trade Start Advisor and is a Senior Export Advisor and is stationed with New South Wales Trade and Investment. Hanh, over to you.
Thank you, Therese. Good morning, everyone. It's good to talk to you today. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
I'm just checking. And were you able to see my slide yet?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So let me turn it on. Okay, so just hold on. It seems to be a little bit static. All right, so moving on from what Dianne and Liz and Stefan has been saying, I would really urge everyone today to start thinking about, are you really ready to export? I have, in my experience as senior export advisors in Sydney, a lot of businesses actually came and talked to me that wanting to export before they even actually explore the domestic market. But it is very important to know that by building the domestic market, you actually build a lot of consumer insights. You actually build your financial capability to help you to export, because exporting is quite a cost discovery process. So there's usually a very basic checklist that I would urge all of the business to look at when I speak to those businesses about exporting, and you can always refer back to this checklist later on. So really, I like to talk a little bit about myself, my positions. I actually sit within the New South Wales government, but I also deliver the program for Austrade. And so in effect, I actually wearing two hats. I'm delivering export support services for New South Wales, as well as using the Austrade resources to be able to support exporter. So today in my slide, I'm going to talk about four key things. I'm going through the networks that I represent, the services that I provide, and the resources that we've put together for exporters, as well as some financial assistance available from state as well as from federal government. In terms of states initiative, so as I mentioned, I sit within New South Wales Treasuries. we have a wide network of advisors within our states. I cover Sydney North. My colleague Sunny Kwong actually is not here today, but she covers Sydney South. So there are basically two of us, only two of us in Sydney Metro at the moment. We are very busy. We actually, you know, on the road a lot of the time, out and about seeing businesses and supporting them with the advice that they need. And we also have a tight connection with Austrade, and so we actually, accessing Austrade's resources to be able to support those businesses accordingly. We also having our important allies and partners. As you can see today, our most important allies is ECAs, Oz Industries, as well as Export Finance. We always go together, representing the most suitable support available for exporters. I also maintain a number of private sector specialists who you would usually sometimes need to reach out to. So for example, in my area of Sydney North, I do actually deal with, work with a lot of exporter in the health and medtech businesses area. And so their requirement on specialists in certain area is very specific. So I do maintain a number of private sector consultants, should they ever need it to reach out to. I also provide them the support of those that are qualified. So as I mentioned, I'm wearing two hats, New South Wales as well as Austrade. So in terms of the New South Wales government network, I'd just like to highlight on the left-hand side is, you know, the coverage that we have in New South Wales. We have 6 advisors in the regions, but in Sydney, especially if you see the purple shaded part, is Greater Sydney. It is currently divided into 2. So Sunny, my colleague, looks after Sydney South, and I look after Sydney North. So anything from the Parramatta River up north, I do cover those areas. And then on the right-hand side, it's the locations of our overseas offices that the New South Wales government currently is present. As you can see, so we have offices in San Francisco, in Japan, in Korea, and 2 offices in China. So up to October last year, we have around over 20 staff overseas. So these offices are headed up by trade commissioners and business development managers who are very key, and they actually, we compare them as a gate opener because they are the one that connected exporter to overseas buyers. After October last year, we've been able to start looking to adding more people in the overseas network. And so we're expecting in the next 12 to 18 months, New South Wales will add another 20 staff in various areas. So as you can see, December last year, we've actually appointed trade and investment commissioners in Vietnam, embedded in Austrade office. We also have trade investment commissioners based in Singapore. And so we'll have a number of more offices popping up in Southeast Asia in order to support our exporter to reach wider and further into these areas. So in terms of Austrade, as I mentioned, because we also wearing the Austrade hats. So Austrade in Australia is the Trade Start Network actually is the program that we are involving in, has a wide network of advisors nationwide. And this map is just to show you how widely this network are actually located and where we are. So as you can see, Sunny and me is based in Parramatta in Liverpool on the map. And then we have a lot of other similar advisors in other states. And so it is to show that, you know, it's an initiative to support exporter throughout Australia. So in terms of Austrade Global Network, it's a lot more extensive. As you can see, Austrade has around 70 offices overseas that could support with the export development in detail. So the offices ranges, you know, from the US, UK, Southeast Asia, India. And this is just to show you the advantages of, you know, having a connection with Austrade and being able to showcase the product and the capability that you're able to offer to your potential buyers overseas, because the offices that Austrade manage overseas are actually there to be able to help you connect with buyers in these markets. So in terms of the services, I think I'll probably spend a little bit more time on this. The services that I provide, and it's similar to my colleague Sunny, we provide general advice first as a first step. So usually whenever we speak to businesses, we want to know where you are at, whether you are still early on in your export journey, or are you already quite ready? And it's in saying ready, I would refer to the initial 7 questions that we asked at the beginning. If you say yes to all of those, yes, then that means that you're well ready, and there will be other support that are more relevant to you. But if some of the questions, you know, you come back, you're unsure, or you say no, then obviously our job is to help you ready and build your capability to be ready for being able to start looking into export. So I provide general export support. We usually is always a one-stop shops advisors for anything to do with export development, whereas on trainings, it's the area of expertise for ECAs, and I always refer businesses wanting to learn specifically on exports, always come to ECA initially. So in terms of the tailor service, as I mentioned, if your business are well ready, you've exported already, and you wanted to export into a new market, that's where the tailor service steps in. And the tailored service could involve a more tailored, that are only for your businesses, research into a particular market. It could help you, you know, searching for potential partner. And in a normal time, it could be, you know, letting you be able to go and travel and meet these potential buyers. Also, because there will be a lot of things that Austrade cannot do. So we only have a certain amount of resources, and our BDM also receiving similar requests from hundreds of other exporter and product on a daily basis. We also provide a pre-qualified referral of specialists and consultants in certain areas. So if, for example, if you're looking to export to China for a health and supplement product, it is an area in terms of regulatory requirements, it is quite complex, and I would always recommend you to reach out to specialists that have done the similar product and has been successful, and that helps you guarantee and be confident that, you know, the regulatory requirements that you are trying to adapt is suitable for the market. And also the other service that we do is, you know, to identify the opportunity and connect Australian businesses. So given that the office that we have under New South Wales government, as well as Austrade, as you can see, they are quite widespread around the world. We do receive interest from buyers in these markets that were sent over to us from our business development managers in markets. And based on these requests, we do look at exporter that have the capability and capacity to supply. For example, a few weeks ago, we were facilitating a major inquiry for an importer in Indonesia who wants to buy sauces and condiments from New South Wales. They were quite familiar with Victoria, but they wanted to look and diversify. And so we were working on that and nominate exporter. I think it was 2 weeks ago, we facilitated an opportunity for UHT milk inquiry from Vietnam. So that inquiry actually come in on a daily basis, and it's quite it could be a really useful export development should we know your business capability and capacity. So it's always helpful to reach out and share a bit more information of what you wanted to do, what market you're looking at, and what have you achieved, because it's really important. It helps us and the BDM overseas to be able to build the confidence and be able to talk to importer about your product. Now, in terms of missions and events, Austrade in the past used to run a lot of missions. It has changed a little bit, and building on top of that, because of COVID, no physical events is happening right now. But learning from last year, because COVID happened all of a sudden last year, there were some virtual missions and events, and businesses were able to showcase your product online, and that's it. But has recently Austrade has been learned from that and be able to build on the ability to do hybrid events where exporter could showcase your product online, and then you can send samples to the in-markets, and then Austrade in-market could put up a showcase, physical showcase. They will invite buyers overseas to come and have a look at your product on the spot. So it's a hybrid event, and I think we've learned a lot from it, and we've moved away from just being online. We are, as everyone say, building as we're flying the plane as well at some point. So that's an example of what we do. So currently, Austrade, Taiwan, and Hong Kong is building a similar event for premium product for Australia. So I'm working with a number of businesses to help showcasing their product at the moment. Now, the New South Wales Going Global program is a major program. So late last year, New South Wales was handed extra budget to be able to support exporter to do more overseas. And the Going Global program was one of the 3 components that actually came out from that initiative. We call it the New South Wales Export Assistance Package. So the first assistance package is actually the New South Wales Going Global program, and in which we actually organize 14 streams of different companies in different sector to be able to go to 14 different areas or markets. So for example, for India, we had 4 streams of businesses. We have businesses joining to be able to go and develop export development for clean tech, for advanced manufacturing, for food and beverage, and so on. So we have currently maintaining and working on the 14 streams, and the program is running already, and it's meant to wrap up in June and July this year. And so it has been a major work for New South Wales. The other element of the export assistance package, which I'm going to highlight in the financial support, because it's actually a financial support. And I actually jumped the slide a little bit and wanted to mention it here. So it's actually the third one on your left column. It's called the New South Wales Export Assistance Grant. So this grant is actually quite valuable to look at. If you have exported in the past and you stop because of COVID, you're still eligible for it. So I urge everyone to go on and have a look at the grant. Each of the businesses is entitled to up to $10,000 of refunding from your export market development cost. So if you send samples to your potential exporter, you know, you can't travel. So if you do things that are to be able to improving your e-commerce platform, for example, then you are eligible to make the claim for the grant. We have the grant open until June this year, and there is still quite a fair bit of funding to go for. So I would urge everyone to look into the grant and make the most of it. I might jump a little bit back to the tools and resources. So there are a number of tools and resources that are available for exporter, but the main thing and the new thing I wanted to highlight is the digital export services that Austrade has launched 2 weeks ago. So it was on the 17th of March. After months of work and tests and trials and, you know, receiving a lot of feedback, the digital export services has been launched. And so in these digital export services, what we're trying to do is to help businesses to be able to be self-efficient. So we know that you're very good at doing your own research, and you also only wanted to reach out when you really need. You would have questions that is not, you don't want be able to pick up the call and ask anyone straight away. So this tools is available for everyone to really look into. You'll be able to search for your export market. So you could, you know, put on your product in the search bar, have a look at it. I'll send you the link. You'll be able to put your keyword on the search bar. You'll be able to search for identifying potential markets, look for regulatory requirements for that particular market, and it has a lot of guidance in terms of, you know, building export market plan for your particular product. And then obviously Austrade, under Austrade, the trade services, as I've highlighted, it includes general support as well as tailored support. The New South Wales government is still having the export readiness checklist for you to have a look. It has all of the, you know, questions for you to go through and, you know, gauge your readiness, and you could always bring that back to me when you wanted to discuss where you wanted to improve, and our job is to be able to provide the relevant advice to help you improve. So the other support is also the free trade agreement portal. It helps you, you know, put in your product HS code and be able to see what are the key requirements if you deal with a country that have an FTA with Australia. So I'm just
sorry, I think we might have to cut this short because Charith also has to do his presentation.
Correct. Yep. Okay.
And we've run over time, so
yep.
Thanks.
Okay.
But certainly we'll pass these presentation on to the participants so that they can go through this as well,
yes.
And any of the contacts and links that you have. So I might just finally introduce Charith Amarasinghe, who works for Export Finance Australia, and this is really about the pointy end of how do you finance your expansion or your exporting, and this we felt was the best last piece of information that people would need to know. So I hand it over to you, Charith.
Thanks, Therese. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah, I'm mindful of the time and we are past the finish time, so I won't share the slides that I had prepared, but instead I thought I'll just give you a quick few minute of an overview, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach us out directly afterwards. So a common theme across all the previous presentations were that you need to have your house in order before you take on export. Dianne made the important distinction at the outset that Australia is 25 million people and the rest of the world is 7 billion or 8 billion minus that 25 million people. So that brings a lot of scale. That scale brings a large opportunity, but at the same time, that large opportunity can have large implications on your business. So you really need to understand what those implications might be before you take on export opportunities. And one of those implications, or the obvious ones, are finance. So as a business, are you ready from a financing point of view, or do you have the financial capacity to take on those large export opportunities, especially with markets such as China, India, US, UK, which are obviously much larger than the Australian market? Their minimum orders might be, your weeks or months worth of sales that you do here in Australia. So the ideal situation for a business is if you have sufficient cash flow within your existing business that can support the export business, whether that's negotiating favorable payment terms with your buyer in the form of a deposit or regular milestone payments, and more importantly, making sure you're paid before your goods leave Australia, from managing non-payment risk as well. That's the ideal situation. But not all businesses, as we know, especially SMEs, have spare $500,000 or $1 million parked aside in a bank that you can support your export growth. If you're not in that fortunate situation, which most businesses aren't, you can reach out to your friendly banker and see whether the bank is willing to provide support. Again, depending on your situation and the company, depending on what security you might have available to provide to the bank, bank funding may not always be available to a business. So then it comes down to, okay, you've got a great product, you've got a commercially viable export opportunity, but how do you finance it? So that's where Export Finance Australia could potentially come in. We've spoken about a variety of services that are provided by the government to support exports. We are another form of assistance, but just limited to finance. Export Finance Australia is the official export credit agency of Australia. What that simply means is that we are a government-owned financier that is able to provide a range of financial solutions to Australian companies that are engaged in export or export-related business activities. I won't get into too much detail around what export-related means, but basically we can help a business that exports a product directly out of Australia, whether that's a physical product or a service. As Dianne mentioned before, services exports are an integral part of Australian exports. And at the same time, we can also help the supply chain behind that export as well. A key distinction that I should note is that although we are owned by the government, we operate on a commercial basis. What that means is that the financial solutions that we provide carry commercial terms. So we don't provide any grants, we don't provide any concessional funding, or we don't provide any equity into startup businesses to get things going. Instead, where we would come in is where there's an established product or a commercialized product, a business with track record, looking to take advantage of export opportunities. But you don't have the funding or access to funding through your own cash flows or via the local banks, and you need that additional working capital in order to execute on an export and get paid. So the most common example I can quote, or the most typical scenario we get involved, is an Australian business who secures a large export order, but you will only get paid 30 days after you ship the goods, or 30 days after or the goods arrived at the destination. And that might mean you need to pay for that or absorb that cost of production and shipping up until 6 months or 9 months or whatever that cycle is. So that's a typical situation that we come in and provide short-term working capital. We can also provide more medium to longer term funding if you need to expand capacity of your factory to take advantage of export opportunities, or if you need to set up a presence overseas, we can look at providing support for some of those as well. So our website is exportfinance.gov.au. We have a range of case studies and all more information about all the other solutions we provide. In the interest of time, I will stop there, but please feel free to reach out directly if you have any questions. Thanks, Therese.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for Q&As. What I will do, if all the speakers are agreeable, not Liz, is to share the email contact details of our very good advisors, and also the recording, and as I said, the slide decks as well, so that you can go through the information at your own pace. But I do want to thank Liz especially, and Dianne, and Charith, and Hanh. Sorry for cutting you short. And also James, who's there, and James has been a great help from Penrith Council, and Stefan, of course. So we'll end it there, but thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good day,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you all.
Bye.